Thank you again. The continent of Africa is at the present time very much in the eye of the world because of a number of developments that are unfolding, particularly in the area of Southern Africa. We have experienced in the past 2 to 3 years the victorious conclusions of rather protracted wars of national liberation in countries like Angola and Mozambique, which also had an effect in the consolidation of the state of Guinea-Bissau, which had been declared even before Portuguese colonialism had been routed in the other two former Portuguese colonial areas that I have referred to. We have seen an intensification of the armed struggle in countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia, bringing about a flurry of diplomatic activity, at one time shuttle diplomacy by our erstwhile Secretary of State, Kissinger, and at another time so-called Geneva talks on the transfer of power to the black majority in Zimbabwe. And now we hear of a new Anglo-American initiative which is supposed to effect the immediate transfer of power to the African majority in that troubled land. At the same time, in neighboring Namibia, the South African racist regime is engaged in an exercise of enforcing some counterfeit settlement in an attempt to deny the people of Namibia their just reward for their ever encouraging struggle, which has been waged primarily through arms. Even within the citadel of white domination in Southern Africa itself, inside the so-called Republic of South Africa, the world witnessed an unprecedented national uprising initiated by children from as low a level of schooling as primary all the way up to junior secondary schools, high schools, and even universities. And momentarily we even had some of the white students from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg joining in this campaign and expressing their solidarity and support with the young children of Soweto who refused to have their standard of education further lowered through the introduction of the narrow and completely parochial Afrikaans language, a language which our people identify with their enslavement. This then shows that the protracted struggles of the African people, which have been particularly intensified after the Second World War and gained even further momentum when the rest of Africa was able to throw off the yoke of colonialism, be it French, British, Belgian, and now Portuguese. These have had a tremendous inspirational value as well as impact on the mentality and the political consciousness of the Africans, even within those countries where they are opposed to superbly equipped white settler domination forces that have always enjoyed the automatic support of Western countries, be it in military supplies, in economic relations, in investments, in diplomatic as well as in political support. Simultaneously with the advance of these struggles, with the victories that are being scored at this time, the struggle in Southern Africa is becoming like a magnet force for the contention of world powers, particularly the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. As I have said, traditionally, the Western countries have always, at very best, given benign neglect to the plight and the cause of the African people in that part of the world, whereas the socialist countries have lended support to the freedom fighters of the region, up to and including the supply of weapons with which to challenge the modern arms that are used by either South Africa, Rhodesia, or the occupation forces of South Africa itself in Namibia. We do see some kind of movement at this time on the part of Western countries. Over the past few weeks, the ambassadors of the 5 Western countries that are represented in the Security Council, namely the 3 permanent members, the United States, Britain, France, and then West Germany and Japan, have gone on to see the South African Prime Minister, particularly over the question of Namibia, and we are told that they have been exercising some arm twisting. There is evidently a kind of dominoes theory again in play in this regard, where we hear much said about South Africa releasing the international territory of Namibia, the Rhodesians being forced to capitulate in Zimbabwe, and then eventually apartheid being eradicated in South Africa. For our part in the National Liberation Movement, we find that the initiative of the West is far too little and it comes far too late. Because what has happened is that through their own independent efforts, and with some amount of support from socialist countries, third world countries, as well as the Organization of African Unity primarily, the African people in Azania, the African people in Namibia, the African people in Zimbabwe have developed their struggles to a point whereby, as confirmed in this film, with all the obnoxious comments notwithstanding, whereby the whites in South Africa are themselves feeling tremendously threatened by the potential of resistance that is resident within Azania itself. We find that the same kind of development has taken place in Zimbabwe, where the armed struggle has reached up to 30 miles within Salisbury, the capital of the Ian Smith regime. And indeed, daily the South African racist regime itself confesses that the forces of national liberation in Namibia are intensifying their struggle and reaching up to 400 miles deep into the country. The natural consequence of these developments, of the national uprising that took place in Azania last year, in Soweto, of the armed struggles that are taking place in these 2 other territories that are still under white domination, is that these people with patience, good organization, loyalty to the liberation movement, we will be able to carry out the job of liberating themselves by themselves. And we see the intervention of the Western countries as nothing more than a deliberate ploy to try and secure their vested interests, which total billions and billions of dollars. The United States alone is invested to a tune of $1.6 million in my country, in South Africa. Throughout the years, when we have painfully and painstakingly and patiently lobbied Washington, spoken at the United Nations, lobbied London, spoken in many forums in that country, when we have lobbied Paris and Bonn, when we have tried to persuade the entire Western countries to withdraw their investments in South Africa, to cut off their trade with South Africa, to stop their diplomatic relations with South Africa, we have continuously been told that our demands were too radical and that continuously we must hope for a much more peaceful and reasonable solution. Simultaneously with these exhortations from the Western countries, we have seen an ever-increasing trend towards investment, military collaboration, and diplomatic support for South Africa. Western countries, before the ugly features of apartheid were so successfully exposed, by the PAC campaign in 1960, when several of our followers were massacred at Sharpeville, Langa, Nyanga, and other places, Western investors simply had as an explanation that they were seeking after profits in South Africa, and that is why they were conducting investments in that country. Later, when the South African racist regime became an international pariah, when world opinion started to rise against this fascist regime, and support committees against the South African racist regime and in support of the liberation movement were mushrooming all over, particularly in Western countries, a new rationale was invented. And this rationale was to the effect that the continued flow of economic investments from Western countries would help to erode apartheid and bring about a situation whereby the South African racist regime would be compelled to make meaningful concessions to the black population. Now, this argument cannot survive the test of simple experiment in terms of logic. If we judge the history of South Africa, we find that from the time of the discovery of gold in our country, progressively there has been an increase in the inflow of investments into South Africa. This was even more escalated after the Sharpeville uprising, when the South African racist regime used draconian laws, martial law, and every conceivable method of institutionalized violence to ban the liberation movement. PAC was only 1 year and 2 days old. To imprison leaders, to exile others, to crack down on trade union leaders, to intensify the reservation scheme that is known as the Bantustan scheme, which keeps Africans in those Bantustans as cheap labor reservoir, or uses those Bantustans as part of the genocide campaign of liquidating people that are obsolete to South African industries, in that is where widows, orphans, and the infirm are dumped, where they cannot even eke out a living because of the barren conditions, because of the non-existence of any means of subsistence in these areas. When that situation, when that fascist system was being firmly entrenched by the South African fascist regime, the Western countries rushed in. Because of the cheap labor they were able to secure in South Africa, because of the very rich natural resources that South Africa has in gold, in diamonds, in uranium, and every other conceivable mineral which is so important to Western industries. Because of all those economic advantages, these countries went into plunge into South Africa, and not because they had any desire to improve the lot of the African masses. So that the argument that has frequently been peddled around by Western countries, that by their involvement in South Africa's commercial life, they will in any way ever improve the lot of the African masses, is deceitful as much as it is dishonest. And as I have pointed out, South Africa, because of the kind of labor laws that operate against Africans in that country, is able to bring for capital investment from anywhere else, from anywhere in the world, returns of up to 25%, which is higher than anywhere else that foreign investors can get. Even in countries like Spain or Chile or something like that, they would get only between 11 and 12%. So that at the same time as bringing in these investments to South Africa, these Western countries prop up the apartheid system because they bring in very valuable technical and other know-how, which enables the white minority to perfect its system of oppression. Furthermore, it must be borne in mind that these people are in direct contracts in many respects with the South African racist regime. Let us take a few American companies, for instance. IBM does not impose any restrictions on the use of its computers in South Africa, and as such, they are freely used by the South African Army as well as by the South African Police Force. Ford Motor Company has always supplied vehicles for the carrying of troops and policemen in South Africa. General Motors is engaged in similar contacts with the South African racist regime. Chrysler Corporation with its plant in Pelindaba in Pretoria, has had one of its executives say that in times of strife, the plant that they have in Pelindaba could very well easily be converted for the manufacture of tanks and other armored vehicles to be used by the South African racist regime. So that all of the Western involvement in our country has been an involvement that is directly against the broad masses that are fighting for their just liberation from South African apartheid and control. We would like to say, however, as I have pointed out, that it is strange that Western countries should perennially be complaining about the drift of Africa towards communism. After all, I think it is a universal law that any people, whoever they may be, are free to choose the kind of political and social system under which they should live. It would be very impertinent on the part of Africans to come to the United States of America and say that in the light of your capitalist system, which has seen such deprived areas as Southside in Chicago, in Watts, in Harlem, in the Bronx, all over these United States of America, in the rural areas in the South, we feel that you Americans should abandon your capitalist system and opt for a communist system. It is not in our place. Indeed, it is in the place of the American people to determine that kind of system that they will choose to live under. But let me say that this concern also is very deceitful as it is dishonest. Because if indeed there was any interest in trying to preserve the non-aligned stand of the African nations, the United States would show more concern towards upholding just causes. But what do we have? Not so long ago, in the wake of the murder of political prisoners in South Africa, almost on a weekly basis ever since the uprising, in the wake of killing of scores, thousands of children in Soweto, Guguletu, Alexandra Township, and all over South Africa following the June 16 uprising in South Africa. Children as little as 4 years of age. In the wake of the carnage unleashed by the South African racist regime throughout the country, the imprisonment of over 4,000 people, the Carter administration made very, very high-sounding noises about the human rights of people all over the globe, and even went to the extent whereby it would impose certain restrictions or certain strictures on foreign aid, etc., and what have you, against those countries that practice policies that offend in the concept of the Americans' human rights. But nowhere at any of that time did the presidents of the United States of America deem it fit to communicate to the South African racist regime its own protests over the existence of over 10,000 political prisoners in that country, counting the people that had been serving time before the June uprising, counting the SASO students that had been sentenced for doing nothing more than raising their a slogan in support of Frelimo's ascension to power in Mozambique in December last year. People are serving up to 12 years. They did nothing to protest what I have referred to as the summary executions of political prisoners in South African police stations almost on a weekly basis, including a young doctor who was a branch chairman of the Pan-Africanist Congress last December in a Soweto area. Nowhere did we see any registration of protest with the South African racist regime on the part of the Carter administration. Instead, the rationale that was employed was the rationale that there are certain countries which are of strategic and other importance to the United States, and therefore these will be saved the kind of embarrassment which was visited upon the Soviet Union for its own malpractices in this regard. So we find that there are these always ranking double standards. And we wonder if, by any chance, it is a coincidence that it is in effect always where it affects Africans, where there are these oversights on the parts of Western leaders. But I dare say that if the Uganda madman Idi Amin were to so much as harm a fly You know, cables from the Pope would come and the President of the United States would be upset, and we would be subjected to all kinds of sanctimonious statements and all kinds of moral lectures. We believe that these criticisms should not be sectarian, nor should they be selective. We believe that the United States of America is in command of certain moral responsibilities that she has invited upon herself by declaring herself a leader of the free world. That since we, the freedom fighters in our country, are indeed the champions of the sacred principles that are adumbrated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the Charter of the United Nations, we should rank first amongst those countries that call themselves free, express solidarity with. Yet this has been glaringly absent, not only from this administration, but from successive administrations in the United States of America. So that we have elected on a course, and our course is a cause of armed struggle. The Pan-Africanist Congress was formed in April 1959. We were responding to a groundswell of opinion throughout the country that reflected that it was no longer possible for us to wage any meaningful struggle through the use of simple passive resistance and other such lukewarm protest methods. That the need had arisen for our people to take, as our brothers elsewhere in Africa were doing, positive action if we were to see the end of white colonial rule in our country. We rejected the notion and continue to reject the notion that the white settler minority in our country had automatically, due to the passage of time, become part and parcel of our country. We recalled very strongly that Dutch and European settlers had come to our country purely to seek a transit station, had abused the hospitality of our forefathers, and had progressively usurped the rest of the land area of our country. And that therefore our struggle should not be a struggle for reforms or a struggle for the sharing of park benches or sharing of toilet facilities as has been depicted in this film. That ours is a struggle for a national right, our land, and our right to self-determination. Therefore the PAC spelled it out from the very inception that it would not be sufficient in any way to fight for concessions here or there, but that the ills that our people face as they are channeled off to Bantustan reservations, the ills that our people face as they are harassed day in and day out for passes, the ills that our people face as they are paraded off into ghettos, the ills that our people face as they are incarcerated for raising their just democratic demands, that each and everyone, the bloody massacre of our children for protesting an evil system of education, all of these are resident in the fact that we are a conquered people. We have to get ourselves deconquered if in any way we must assert ourselves. To us, even, to speak of human rights, which I assume are civil rights, is really to understate the case. Because the most meaningful right is the fundamental right of having the political say-so in the land of your own birth. And that therefore our struggle should be for the seizure of political power. Nothing less. We targeted the South African pass laws as the first object of assault under our positive action campaign on March 21 because the pass laws have the effective control on the total life of an African person. No child, no matter how small, can be born anywhere in South Africa without a permit having been specifically issued for its father or mother to be resident in that given area. No parent can ever reside with his or her spouse in any given area without the express permission of the South African racist regime. Every working person has to obtain a permit in order to be in any employment. And every person has to have his or her pass signed before or on or about the 7th of each month. So that the life of the African is very viciously controlled through this one single act of the South African apartheid regime. We directed our attack against it because we recognized that to To knock that off would be to remove an important linchpin of the South African apartheid colonial system. And above all, our intention was to ensure that the wheels of industry would ground to a halt so that we could use our most powerful weapon outside armed struggle, the weapon of the labor that we are robbed of day in and day out on South Africa's shop floors, in South Africa's mines, in South Africa's farms, so that we could bring down the government to its knees and force it to comply with the demands of the African people. And we said that, much as this was a positive action campaign, it would be a non-violent campaign. But the South African racist regime ended it violently at Sharpeville, Langa, and Nyanga. And for us, that was the close of the path of non-violence. We opted from that time to attack the system through armed struggle. Much as we were never in the colonial army, much as we have never been taught in the use of modern weapons, we elected to form units of underground armed resistance elements in the PAC. We called this POCO. Our men took on South African racist police, spies, and other informers, other reactionary settlers in various centers throughout South Africa. Even at one time, they took control of the town of Paarl until a relief was sent in. A relief column was sent in from Cape Town. We took on the South African racist regime's police forces at Queenstown Station when they attempted to intercept a unit of POCO men that had been sent to go and liquidate Matanzima, who is the chief sellout in the Transkei. There was a running battle in the Ntlonze Mountains between the POCO underground workers and the South African racist police throughout the months of January and February in 1963. Several white construction workers who were violating African grazing fields at Bashi Bridge were liquidated by a POCO unit. Special branch policemen were killed in Krugersdorp. And all of these were undertaken through sheer dedication. We suffered many losses, but we lacked the sophistication of weapons which our enemy possesses. Since then, we have been invited to come abroad by progressive countries, mainly African countries, and we have acquired the skills. But South Africa has had for a number of years the blessing of a number of buffer zones, particularly the Portuguese colonies and the Rhodesian racist regime, whereby it interfered with the easy flow of trained guerrilla units from rejoining the underground and developing the people's army that we needs must create for our people's war. But all of those obstacles are beginning to collapse, one after the other. The delays will be there because South Africa is a military force to be reckoned with in that area. That racist regime was spending only $20 million on arms in 1960. Today it is spending close to $2 billion on arms. It is using these weapons to intimidate independent African states that support our struggle. It has indeed committed aggression against Angola. It has passed a law which says that it will attack any country south of the Sahara which is known to be posing a security threat to South Africa, meaning that any country that gives military assistance to the liberation movements in Azania so that they could develop the armed struggle inside the country is vulnerable to a threat. Maybe there will be delays because of this, but we have recognized from studying the revolutions of other countries, whether it be in China, in Vietnam, in Korea, in Cuba, in Algeria, in Angola, in Mozambique, in Guinea-Bissau, in Kenya, that for us we have to develop our own unique form of armed struggle, utilizing the experiences that we have learned from other combatants in other parts of the world to the concrete conditions that obtain in our country. And the experience of the national uprising, when we had little children sharpening nails and using catapults to fire at policemen, when we had old ladies waiting at their windows as police were chasing young militants with hot water, with boiling water, and pouring it on these police, when we had our people seize trucks from the South African army and driving these trucks into police compounds or against police units, have convinced us that our people have within them the creativity to wage a successful people's war by creating own guerrillas within our own given territory with the limited experiences that we have picked up abroad. So there, we know that for us, it cannot be a guerrilla war of roving bands of hit and run into neighboring territories. Because these countries would have their own independences jeopardized, we have to develop the armed struggle right inside our own territory, just as was the case perhaps in China, and indeed in these United States of America was the case in the 60s, when many black ghettos were up in arms against the establishment in this country. We stress one thing, and we want to re-emphasize that. We stress that our struggle must be waged in a self-reliant manner. We have not and we will not call for any external assistance. The only external assistance that we expect is solidarity from friends all over the world. We expect people to make contributions. Materially, we expect people to demonstrate solidarity morally. We expect people to raise the justness of our cause through every available platform. In England, MPs are systematically lobbied. The government is systematically petitioned by pressure groups advocating for a disengagement of the British government. We have seen here in the Congress of the United States of America a few forward-looking people like Senator Dick Clark from the state, I believe, and others beginning to take certain initiatives that are enlightened and attempting to disengage the South African racist regime in our country. We believe that also here there is a body of some 30 million African descendants who should be having a vital interest in the developing situation in our country, just as we have a continuing vital interest in their own liberation. That there is a need for us to consolidate a united front at this level, and for these people to use their weight within these United States of America, perhaps to a far more effective, for a far more just cause than perhaps is being used by the Jews for their cousins in Israel, for what I believe is in an even unjust cause. There is no reason why the United States of America, after its experiences in Indochina, its experiences in Latin America, should seek, through its multinational corporations, which are over 375 in my country and are investing over $1.6 billion, as I have said, to be sucked into the conflagration that is going to break out in Southern Africa. At the present moment, this struggle is not of the dramatic proportions that you have seen perhaps in the Middle East or you have seen in Southeast Asia. But its potential for such conflagration is very great. It is great in the respect that there are certain powers here in the United States that will fight to the last dollar on the side of the South African apartheid regime. And they are corporate America. And as we all know, corporate America is the determining force in the creation of foreign policy in this country. There are certain elements within the military of the United States of America in the Pentagon, which are even advocating the establishment of bases in places like Points and Joint, as was revealed in a military magazine here not so long ago. There are certain forces that are a relic not only from the Cold War era, but also from the invasion of the Congo at one time, ostensibly for the rescue of one missionary in Stanleyville, when in effect it was a clear move to try and set up in the Congo a neo-colonial government. We have seen some Bantustan puppet chiefs being received by people like Carter in this country. And these people are well known for being nothing more than tribal chiefs, appointees, or wage earners of the South African racist regime. The true representatives of our people are in prison, are under house arrest, or have been exiled. The attempt by the government of the United States of America or the governments of Western countries to go over the heads of the true representatives of our people is nothing but a recipe for civil war in our country. It is with that same respect that we in the PAC, who are completely self-reliant and completely independent, who have been motivated in our fight for freedom by an ideal to rise Africa, to bring Africa into a fore, to unite the continent of Africa and make a power to reckon with in world affairs as an independent force, are as critical of tendencies
from countries like the Soviet Union to come into our country and pick and choose as to what liberation movement they want to support, because this is divisive. And any force on earth which on this day, when we are facing the most critical struggle in our fight, in our protracted war, in our protracted struggle against white settler domination, seeks to divide our people, cannot be a genuine and a true friend. Because if anything, the people of Azania are prepared to bury their differences, and they have demonstrated so in the recent national uprising, in the Black Consciousness Movement, and even in a statement issued by the wife of none other than Nelson Mandela, the leader of the African National Congress, we have been told, who recently told, as I received a clipping from Sweden the other day, that she too is fighting for a socialist Azania, and Azania is the name that was given to South Africa by the Pan-Africanist Congress. That she has commented that the people of Azania want to have, the people of Azania support the PAC and the ANC equally, and has further said that she is not fighting, nor are the people of South Africa fighting to become Black Russians. At a time when our people are so united in the face of the common enemy, the just thing to do for any who claim to genuinely support our cause is to close ranks behind our fighting forces. Now, there may be situations that people may believe they can enforce through superior arms. There may be situations that they believe that they can enforce through trickery. But whatever fait accompli is created and enjoys not the full support of the masses in Azania, it cannot be a final solution. It can only prolong the suffering and extend the warring. And it would be scandalous to arm Azanians to kill other Azanians. Thank you very much.